We're in Daniel chapter 7, starting with verse 7, and we've covered the first three beasts that he saw coming up out of the sea. The first beast, the lion with two eagle's wings. The second was a bear that rolled up on its side that had three ribs in its mouth. And the fourth was a leopard that had four wings of a fowl. And all of these tying to chapter 2, to the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw, which was Babylon, Persia, the Medes and the Persians, and Alexander the Great, or the Grecian Empire. Now this is the fourth beast, or the last beast. And it says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and snapped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So this is the fourth beast. I might say, before we even get into it, this is the beast that kind of took Daniel aback a little bit. I mean, he likened the first one to a lion, the second one to a bear, and the third one to a leopard. But when he sees this beast here, he don't know anything to compare it to. I mean, he don't know of anything in the animal kingdom that would resemble it. And so, that's where we start. So, he sees this fourth beast coming up out of the great sea, and we established that from Scripture itself, we're letting Scripture interpret itself, that's talking about the Mediterranean. Because we went and used Scriptures where it showed that God always was a reference to the Mediterranean as the border to Israel, and so forth and so on. He sees this beast coming up. And the fourth beast now matches the legs of iron and the feet that were a mixture of clay and iron in the image that was in chapter 2, and which was wrong. We established that when we were looking at it. So this is, of course, not an actual picture of that beast. It's an artist's concept of that beast. What's named about it said it had teeth, iron teeth. Some of them say that the word actually means fangs. It had fangs of iron, So this is a weird-looking beast with 10 horns, and it comes up out of the sea. Meaning, of course, in my opinion, meaning that area that surrounds the Mediterranean. Reaching all of that area there. It's kind of a mystery that God in his prophetic plan has all the time, because we see it in the image of the statue in chapter 2. There's just 4 kingdoms that are dealt with the last being a mixture of whatever the last kingdom is. And then here, it's just 4 kingdoms that are being dwelt with, And they're all kingdoms that have existed in that area over there. So and I know that a lot of prophetic scholars have laid hold to certain things in there and tried to make it match Great Britain and tried to make it fit America and tried to fit Europe and all of that. But if we just stay with what God said, it's those kingdoms around there. The Roman Empire, some way, it has extended and will extend all the way to the end. maybe not in the sense that that it will be an empire that's ruling and all of that, but things that that were put in place in the Roman Empire are going to extend all the way to the end. For example, the way the government was set up in the Romans, with the Senate and with a democratic or Republican type of a setup, where they were voting and all of this stuff. That may be one of the things that's going all the way to the end, And over the course of time, what we see in the feet, is that the iron and with the clay, it gets to be a weakened setup, So just kind of throwing that in. We're going to deal with that quite a bit more in the chapter and things to come. A little bit of history. It's a little hard to see this, but concerning Rome. Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus, who was the first king of Rome. The way it come about was he set up that he began to conquer other city-states from the peninsula. Then he conquered Sicily. And then, of course, this is just condensed. And then he attacked Carthage in North Africa. And if I remember correctly, this was like the third of the Punic Wars that took place when he took Carthage, which established them in North Africa. And then following the defeat of Carthage, Rome consolidated its power in the Mediterranean under the leadership, and Pompey was quite a leader, a general. He was quite a veteran of wars. Pompey made a lot of conquests for Rome. And in a little bit we'll see his dealings with Judea. It was because of the Maccabean. Now, remember we talked about Antiochus Epiphanes, and we talked about how this priest with his 5 sons all rebelled against him because they were tearing up the Torah. They were saying that you couldn't, telling people they couldn't circumcise their babies and all of this. And so they rebelled and they defeated. They won the battle, set up a kingdom that lasted almost 100 years. It was known as the Maccabean kingdom. And so at the time that Rome was beginning to get strong, and even when Antiochus Epiphanes decided he would go against Egypt, when he got down there, he met a Roman general down there that said, if you attacked Egypt, then we're going to come against you. And he changed his mind. He turned around, went back into Palestine, and that's when he decided to turn Palestine into a Grecian nation. That's when he wanted to change all the laws and set up statues to the emperor and to and all of that. That's when he sacrificed a sow on the altar and all of that stuff that we talked about earlier. Well, when the Maccabeans won and as time progressed, it come to a point where there were 2 Maccabean descendants, brothers, that were arguing over who was to be king. And so they asked Rome to come in and help decide that. And so that's how Rome got their first entrance into the Holy Land in any powerful way. But these 2 brothers, well, that didn't go well, say, with a lot of the Jews. And so they rebelled against Rome, a war broke out, and the Jews lost. And that gave Rome control of the Holy Land. The war did. They lost that battle. Then in 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey, he conquered the city of Jerusalem. And it was easy to take the city. He didn't have a lot of problems taking the city of Jerusalem. But 12,000 holdouts had ascended to the Temple Mount and had barricaded themselves in up there on the mount. And that gave him a little problem. He ended up killing all of the people on the mount. All 12,000 died up there. Which is kind of an interesting point when we think about this beast, when Daniel is saying he was terrible and dreadful and all of this. You know. See, there was a difference between the Babylonian and the Persian and the Grecian empires when it comes to Rome. When Rome, they didn't do like the others. They used to take slaves, train them, put them in their government. That's how Daniel got in the government of the Babylonian government. That's how he operated in the Persian government. They used to take prime persons and train them and put them in, use them in the kingdom. All of those did, but not the Romans. The Romans, they just killed them. They just took prisoners. They didn't take, just killed them. So that was one of the differences in the Roman group. After Pompey had taken Jerusalem and Palestine, he set up a puppet ruler there. And that puppet ruler was a guy by the name of Antipater, which was an Idumean prince, who was also the father of Herod the Great. And so that's how the Herodian dynasty got established, was that Antipater was put into authority, and he appointed two of his sons in a position, one of them being Archelaus, and the other being Herod the Great, in positions and so that's how that all got started. But it was all because under Roman rule, that's how it happened. And we know that things progressed under Roman rule until in 64 AD, the Jews rebelled again. And the Romans came in again. They, in the course of this war, over 1 million Jews died during the course of that war. Point being is that this terrible, dreadful beast has been one of the greatest enemies of the Jews over the course of time that they ruled, because so many Jews. Think about it. Think about it. Right now, there's about 20 million Jews in the world? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's about 20 million Jews. I think there's about 5 or 6 that live in Israel. The rest of them live in other countries, but 20 million. Well, that's now. The populations has grown from that point back there. 1 million, losing 1 million would be quite a hit on the Jewish population, even during that time. We read in Revelation that in the end time, during the Great Tribulation, that 2/3 of the Jews will die. Only 1/3 will survive. And if we just use the figures that we have now, 20 million Jews, only 1/3 of those, which would be somewhere around 6 or 7 million, will survive if it would take that time. Anyway, in 70 AD, the Roman army, they took Jerusalem again. during that war, over 1 million people, 1 million Jewish residents, they died there. And but this time, they destroyed the temple. Remember when Jesus had been on the Temple Mount with his disciples, and as he made a statement on the Temple Mount, there as they left the Temple Mount, when his disciples said, "Oh, just look at this, just look at this, isn't this magnificent?" Jesus tells him, and I'm paraphrasing, but Jesus said, "There's not one stone will be upon the other, in the near future." You think that's going to happen. Then it goes up on the Mount of Olives, and then they come to us and say, "Would you explain to us what you meant by that?" And so he does. Well, in 70 AD, they knocked the whole of the temple all down. They say that if you're in history, in some of the books, Josephus and some of the others, they say that you used to come around the road on the Mount of Olives, and if you come around the road in the morning, that the morning sun striking the temple, that it was the most beautiful of sights. That it just shone in the morning sun, the gold and the brass doors and all of that in the morning. And that's why the disciples were so, 43, they told Jesus, you mean to tell me that this has been 46 years in the building and it's going to be destroyed, in a short period of time, But anyway, that's what happened. So that's a little bit of history there. And of course, Rome was instrumental in scattering what was left of the Jews. You remember Assyria had taken the northern 10 tribes and they scattered them all over the world. Then Rome comes in and they take over, and after this they scatter what's left all over. They said out of about a population, this is a kind of a guesstimation, I guess you'd say, but one writer said that out of a population of something like 5 or 6 million Jews projected at that time, there was only a few 100,000 that were left in Israel. The rest of them were scattered all over the place, And it's been that way until 1948. But in 1948, something miraculous took place. The Roman ruled over this area. In fact, the Eastern Empire. I guess the reason that statue had in Revelation, in Daniel chapter 2, had 2 legs is because actually Rome was 2 parts. Yet there was an Eastern Empire and a Western Empire. And actually, the Eastern Empire fell 1,000 years before the Western Empire fell. And that becomes important when we look at chapter 8 and look into the Grecian Empire, because I have an opinion, and it's an opinion. I'll tell you when we get there. But I'll tell you if I got an opinion, and it will be an opinion. But I'm not with all of the prophecy teachers that think that the man of sin is going to come from the European Commonwealth or Europe. I think he's going to come from what was the ancient Western Empire of Rome, somewhere probably either Turkey, Iraq, or the old Assyrian Empire, somewhere around in there. I think that's probably where it is. And I'll show you when we get there. I'll show you how many scriptures in the Bible talk about the Assyrian. And it talks about him in the last days. the Syrian Empire, it had gone away way before Daniel, talking, and his prophecies. But anyway, Rome ruled over Jerusalem until maybe I should say this in a different way. Now, that's good enough. Roman rule over Jerusalem would continue until the Muslims defeated the Byzantine rule in 634. The Byzantine rule was kind of what it ended up being after the Crusades and all of this ended up being over everything. And remember, we did one time about prophecy, a rabbi's prophecy about the Muslims ruling for 400 years or 8 jubilees. I don't know if you remember that. How many of you remember that? We're talking about the Muslims ruling for 8 jubilees, and then 1 jubilee being a period of desolation in the land of Israel, and then after that 1 jubilee, then Israel then would become a nation again. And if you take and you add it all up, it comes out exactly May 14, 1948. Yeah. But anyway, the Byzantines, they ruled, and let's see where I'm at. And the sometimes I lose my place. Anyway, okay, let's go back. The 4th beast was dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And I think I've said enough about why I think that is, because the Roman Empire, they just walked over every country. They killed anybody that resisted them, and that's just the way they did. And if you read how they dealt with nations and with rulers, reading Josiah Josephus' book, Jewish Wars, you see in there how that, if they didn't like somebody, they didn't. They just killed them. They didn't like the way they were acting and what they were doing. Anyway, dreadful beast. That word dreadful can also mean fear. This is something that Daniel, when he's looking at this, he is totally taken with fear and how dreadful this beast is. And if we extend that into the last part of Revelation, the last part of that 7 years, we see how that it can be that way. But Rome's rule over the 107 years after Rome came to assist the these Maccabean brothers, that had requested some help from Rome to decide who needed to be the king. In 107 years, the temple was destroyed, and the Jewish people were nearly destroyed during that period of time. And I can understand why that from the 70 AD, when Israel ceased to be a nation, until 1948, I can understand why biblical preachers, when it talked about Israel, drew a conclusion, well, there's no Israel. There hasn't been an Israel in thousands of years. So, it must be talking about the church. And so, replacement theology stepped in, and people began to say, well, that's promise, and that's all to the church. God has changed his mind. There's no Israel. And so it has to be talking about the church. But you don't hear much of that about that after 1948. you know, the replacement theology, you know. Why? Because God did something, you know, really miraculous in a nation coming back from the dead, you know. Not only the nation, but the Hebrew language, you know, come back. On May 14, 1948, the Jewish nation came back into existence. If you read Isaiah chapter 66, verse 8, it said, how can this happen? You got to read it there, Juanita. Find it, read it to me. But they say, can this happen? Can a nation be born in one day? You know? You know, another thing, in 1947, here's something that I find very interesting. That for centuries now, that land has been wandered over, all of that. But in 1948, a couple goat herder boys, young guys, are herding goats. One of the goats wandered into a cave, and the boy was a little bit concerned about going in that cave. He didn't know what might be in that cave. So he throws a rock into that cave, and he hears something break. And so he goes into the cave, and he finds this manuscript in this jar. And of course, we all know now about the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, there's a museum there in Jerusalem now that's called mine went blank. What is it called? Somebody? No, it's called the. Something of the book. I can't remember the first one. It's something of the book. And that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls are all on display in there. But what I think is that what God did was He gave Israel a birthday present just before they become a nation, in that they received one scroll is over 15 foot long. The smallest is about a quarter of an inch in size. But what has happened is that in going through the scrolls, they found that the Torah is so accurate compared to these scrolls which which existed before Jesus' time, hundreds of years, 100, 200 years before Jesus was even born. And they verify, they fit perfectly with Scripture. Yeah. And it become one of the greatest finds for the Jewish nation because it verified that, first of all, that they had been in the land. It verified that the Torah and the Septuagint and all of this was perfectly in line, very few things. I don't know why these scrolls were in the cave when we were over there. If I remember correctly, our guide told us, he said that if in the Qumran community, those that were translating Scripture, if they made just one little mistake in translation, it was forbidden to burn the scrolls. It was forbidden to in any way tear them up. So what was required was that they bury them. And he thinks that what happened was they put these scrolls in jars and put them in these caves as burying them. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there is very few mistakes in those scrolls compared to the Scripture. So, so I think, well, that's just a birthday. I'll tell you another thing that happened. 1947, because see, in 1947, that's when that's when the UN and all was making plans to make Israel a nation, and the Balfour Declaration and all that, all that's taken place and had taken place and so forth and so on. But another thing is when the Muslims heard about it in Syria, in Aleppo, they burned a synagogue there, a big synagogue. Well, one thing that was in that synagogue was the Aleppo Codex, which was a book that dated back hundreds of years ago, that had been put together by rabbis and everything, comments and so forth and so on. Well, they tried to destroy all of that. But a couple guys went to the burnout synagogue, and they found the little swords. This is another thing that's also preserved in Israel now. It took a while for it to work its way to Israel, but it's a very valuable commentary, very valuable because it contains a lot of the original stuff and so forth. Very valuable. All of this began to happen in 1947, and when Israel became a nation, they brought all of this stuff in, and I think that's God giving them a birthday present, giving a nation a birthday present. You want to say something?
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting that when they declared that they were a nation, 11 minutes after that was done, Harry Truman recognized them as a nation.
Yes.
11 minutes. There's quite a story behind that, too.
And quite a story, too, is that 1948, they were attacked, and by all rights, they shouldn't have won any battle. They shouldn't have been able to win the war. They didn't have anything to fight with.
One of the interesting things behind that was one of Truman's best friends was a Jewish rabbi, and he told him all that had been teaching him over the years, all the stuff that was in the Bible about them getting their country back. So it was not entirely all coincidence or anything. He knew.
I learned in 1973 how Israel won the war against all these Arab nations that were coming against it. Y'all might know, but the Golan Heights is a mountainous area that is a buffer between Israel and Syria. Therefore, it's a buffer against the other nations. Well, in 1973, all these nations were all threatening, and they were bringing in their artillery and all that. And one day, suddenly, Israel just went to those mountains and brought out these portable nuclear missile launchers and pointed them to every one of those Arab nations. That was the end of the war. That was it.
We were up there on the Golan, the Valley of Tears, where this small tank group, the Israeli tank group, just very few of them, and they looked out in the valley, and here come all of the Syrian tanks. I mean, hundreds of them, and there's even tanks still sitting out there that were destroyed, and everything. There's even an Israeli tank sitting up there on the Golan that's destroyed. But for them to win that war, that I was told that our war college here in this country will not study. And y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but I read it somewhere, that our war college will not study any of the wars that Israel has won, because It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah. Anyway, God bless you. We'll pick up right here